critical passion is supporting mums and bubs and recognising the crucial importance of this relationship. She is also a mother of 3 sons. Dr. Adams visited an immigrant detention centre in Australia in 2013, and what happened next will be the story of her published book, out soon, that we also have specially here today. Today she'd like to tell you about what she has learned about connection, family, and standing up for others against cruelty and lies. Please welcome Dr. Emma Adams.
We are on Ngunnawal land. We've been nurtured on Ngunnawal land, and I pay my respects to the elders past and present and all Aboriginal people who hold the spirit of this place. The love I have for my 3 sons, they're the ones slinking down in the 5th row, started before they were born. The love for our children begins in the hopes and love of our ancestors. Feeling my own babies grow and move while dreaming of who this person may be was a magical part of my pregnancies. The most dangerous voyage of normal life is the anxiety and pain and the enormousness of childbirth. This is still, even in Australia, the interface of life and death. But children come into our lives in different ways, and the bond of love is the same. Even after all these years, I can still remember, and always will, the tender memories of moments spent in perfect contentment. My body curled around my sleeping oldest son, my face resting on top of his head, where I felt his silky hair on the edge of my lips and breathed in that beautiful warm baby scent. The love I needed to fight through the pain of infections when breastfeeding my 2nd son. And when we'd won that fight, I can't forget the joy and the relief we found together in the happy snuggle of the feed. And my beautiful youngest son. I can still remember the feel of his tapping his sticky hands on my chest as I cradled him in my arms, both of us perfectly content. Just as well we have these precious memories. They keep us fueled and keep this thread of connection unbroken when things aren't so rosy. But the process of falling in love with our babies, making a place in our hearts for loving a new person, sometimes hurts. As a psychiatrist, my career has been devoted to helping mothers with postnatal depression and other mental illnesses, where situations of overwhelming stress or even the ghosts of a parent's own childhood experiences can get in the way of the here and now pleasure of being with our own children. The relationship we have with our babies and children can be an echo of our own experiences of being a baby with our earliest caregivers. If a new parent's earliest memories are not of warmth and safety, but of fear and confusion, this can be an extremely difficult time for them. Being a parent is a courageous voyage, even in the best of circumstances. When the odds are stacked high, it is a testament to the human spirit that this person endures. At the end of 2013, I went as an observer with an organisation called Chill Out to inspect the conditions and check on the well-being of mums and bubs in Darwin's immigration detention centres. I expected this trip to be confronting. Mothers and babies kept behind bars always is. But nothing prepared me for what I saw. I didn't know it at the time, but the twist of fate that took me to Darwin changed all of our lives forever. The atmosphere in what they call APODs, the supposedly family-friendly version of these detention centres, was suffocating. All had high wire fences. One called Wickham even had a double 10-metre high fence that could be electrified and prison-style airlock gates between each section. I witnessed people called by their boat numbers rather than their names. A guard, although we had to call them officers, laughed and said, "That's because there's too many Husseins." Every mother I saw was suffering, and all the children were distressed, all of them. I saw mothers sitting unresponsive to their own children, lost in their own misery. One woman told me of her escape across the Indian Ocean. "It would have been better if we were eaten by sharks." seemingly oblivious to her little girl weeping beside her. I saw a child aged a little over a year sitting in a sandpit all alone. In no culture is it normal for babies to be left by themselves like that. This baby's face was blank and his dark eyes stared into space as he repeatedly flicked the handle of a brightly coloured plastic bucket. I couldn't help but compare this scene to a photograph I have of my eldest son when he was the same age. Jasper was at the beach, his blue eyes alive and smiling back at us as he paused in his busy digging with a bucket and spade. But the child in front of me was not playing. He was helpless. He couldn't run away or fight this abandonment, and since there was no one around to help soothe his distress, he'd become frozen. All of us were appalled by seeing the footage from the USA of infants and children being taken from parents and warehoused in cages. Taking a parent's hope and traumatising them psychologically, which is what we've been doing, is just as harmful as physically separating a child. When a parent is overwhelmed, when they are lost in a world of trying to survive, they cannot see their child's needs, and their child is left alone and unprotected. Here in Australia was a profoundly abnormal situation. These were families in prison. These people had broken no laws in fleeing to the first country that was signatory to the UN Refugee Convention, and now they were being treated worse than convicted criminals. In the real Australian world outside, I'd be recommending these depressed and traumatised women and their babies be offered intensive psychiatric treatment and psychological help. Here, that would not happen. I was anguished by what I'd seen, and angry, and felt so powerless. What could I do as just one doctor when all the other medical bodies were being ignored? This wasn't politics. There is a line in the sand regarding humane and inhumane treatment of people, and this line had well and truly been crossed. In witnessing all the despair and hearing so many tragic stories, I met a 16-year-old boy called Abdul. He was an unaccompanied child. His mother had sent him to Australia to escape persecution and threats against his life. They were Hazara, an ethnic and religious minority in Afghanistan who've been targeted by the Taliban and now ISIS and other terrorist groups with bomb attacks, kidnappings and murders. There was something else about this boy. He stood straight and perhaps a little defiant when so many other people around were broken. But I could tell his poise was beginning to wear thin too. Abdul asked me, "Am I going to die soon?" He told me that his heart would suddenly beat uncontrollably and his whole body would shake when he remembered the bomb explosion he had nearly died in. In the winter of 2011, suicide bombers attacked Shia Muslims attending their shrine on one of their most holy days of Ashura. Over 50 people died that day, many were babies. The New York Times published a photograph of a girl aged about 11 or 12 standing frozen in a screen. Her green dress, scarf and white leggings were soaked in blood, while heaped around her were the lifeless bodies of other children. Injured adults, bloodied and dazed, were sitting, staring. Abdul also needed surgery for a shoulder injury from when he was hit by a car in Kabul. In Afghanistan, surgery is a very risky business, and Abdul was concerned that his mum would worry about him. At the time, I thought to myself, "Oh, Bub, they're not going to tell your mum. They don't care about her. Or you." I could also tell by the caring and connected way Abdul talked about his family that he was a much-loved child. I thought about the love his mother had, the agonising decision she had to make to send her boy to safety. If I was in her place, I would want someone to look out for my children. Abdul, like the others in detention, faced a hopeless fate and years in limbo. The solution seems simple. Wouldn't any teenage boy be better off staying with a family rather than locked behind a wire fence? Maybe I could help this one lonely child. The year of 2014 was a hard and sad year. The government were not listening to my proposition of having Abdul move in with us while his refugee status was being assessed. Immigration Minister Scott Morrison was not going to let any of the children out of detention unless his bill was passed. This bill was the infamous fast-track process and the reinstatement of temporary protection visas, which, instead of allowing genuine refugees to establish a new and secure life in Australia, most of these kids in detention, including Abdul, were developing severe psychiatric problems, compounded by the stress of indefinite imprisonment and poor treatment. But unless Morrison had his bill passed, he made it very clear the children would stay locked up. Every day in 2014, I thought of Abdul. When my boys came home from school and helped themselves to food out of the fridge, or called out to me as they headed off on their bikes to see their friends, I thought of the wonderful freedoms they didn't know they had. And my thoughts went back to this other boy who every day had none of these freedoms. As often as we could, Abdul and I messaged on Facebook, and I sent him photos. I wanted to show him a place of hope. I sent him photos of gangs in bottlebrush trees and mobs of kangaroos from my runs in the bush. Every time I flew back from visiting him in Darwin, my heart ached as I wished Abdul would have sat beside me as we descended over the beautiful Canberra hills. Unless I could do something, the next stop for Abdul would be Nauru, an ominous, secretive place, and from where in 2014 some very horrible stories were beginning to leak out. In 2014, we found out Abdul had a brother, Ahad, who'd also arrived earlier as an unaccompanied minor. When I invited Ahad to visit for the school holidays, I found out he wasn't doing too well either. From the outset, we thought deeply about how having two refugee brothers living with us would affect our children. Of course, my husband Rob and I expected some difficulties. For mums and bubs, parenting is an ongoing risk management exercise. We only ever get one chance with our kids' childhood. There's no rewind button. Rob and I had our fair share of tut-tut warnings from others about not trusting Muslims and the risks of two traumatised teenagers from a violent war-torn country living under our roof. But these boys weren't strangers to me when I invited them to our home. I always knew Abdul and Ahad were gentle souls. And Rob and I are not stupid, nor are we naive or cavalier about the safety and the health of our family. We went in with our eyes open. Instead of seeing only risks, we saw Abdul and Ahad join us as enriching us all. We wanted our children to see the big picture and that ethics are not just a mouthing of intentions, but a doing. And that often the doing is hard. Of course, none of us could have really predicted what life would be like when these Afghan boys moved in. Our sons had to adjust, and it was hard for them. In the first few months, they bickered more and their grades dropped, and in that interim, our anxiety and anguish was enormous. We had faith that things would work themselves out, and in the most part, it has. It hasn't been a happily ever after. Having these two boys in our lives has been hard work and a gut-wrenching emotional roller coaster. Fast forward to 2018, and I reflect how our love has grown and sustained us as a family. This connection wasn't something that was declared. It's only in retrospect that I can see that we've become a family. Not the one I imagined in my head, but a real one. It's something that grew over these last few years, made out of repeated interactions and precious memories. At the time we made them, in the day-by-day living of them, most of these moments slipped by unrecorded. Ahad begins to interact more and has begun to smile more. We cooked passion fruit slice side by side in the kitchen, in little moments of cosy domesticity. Rob and Ahad worked together in the garden. Ahad gently teases our youngest Toby, who he has a special fondness for by calling him Toby Calls, getting a reaction of ruffled annoyance but also a smile. Abdul leans against me when we're reading together. He pinched my cheek in affection and we went on runs together. It's heartwarming to see the Afghan boys and my older son Jasper sharing a pot of tea together, or the quick-witted verbal sparring that goes on with my middle son Lucas, or the laughs and the regular thumps sounding on the ground which tell me Abdul and Toby are yet again play wrestling. The Afghan boys have had so much to deal with, and of course I was also affected by their emotional turmoil when they had heard more news of terror attacks in Afghanistan, or I witnessed their quiet grief of missing home and their mother. Sadly, we also argued a lot. In peaceful moments of reflection, Abdul told me, we argue about the what-ifs. What if I get sent away? What if you don't care? What if... I wish I could say to Abdul, you're safe now and you can make dreams for your future like my other boys. But we both know this isn't true. His stay in Australia is precarious under the temporary visa system, and Abdul could still be sent back to Afghanistan where his life remains at risk. The most compelling human drive is for connection and belonging. The shelter and protection of the parents' presence are more necessary for the survival of a baby than anything else. It's this unbreakable thread of attachment, of love between a child and their closest carers that is so fundamental in human development. And this need for connection and belonging continues for all of us, all of our lives. And this is what allows our survival in the face of all odds. When I first met Abdul and Ahad, it was kindness, moral conviction, and even pity that made me want to do something. But mere kindness would not have survived what we've been through. What we needed and what has grown is love, the courageous, unbreakable love of family. This is what gives us power and strength and endurance, and with love we can change the world. To finish, my book, Unbreakable Threads, started out as an insurance policy for Abdul. The more people who knew, the safer he would be. But so many innocent people have been damaged by Australia's asylum seeker policies. We care. Australians do care. I hope this book can show how love and family can triumph over what at times has seemed a battle against unsurmountable odds. Thank you.